You're listening to the Justice Hour on 1230 a.m. WBZT. I'm your host, Lisa Macy, and joining me this evening is former Florida Statewide Prosecutor William Shepard. Our phone lines are open. The call-in numbers 561-844-6167 or toll-free 1-800-889-0267. Now, before we took a short break, we were speaking about public corruption and something that Bill Shepard worked on at the Office of Statewide Prosecution. Jim Greer, there were other public officials as well that you prosecuted. Is that correct?
That is correct, and a number of other investigations. And frankly, we've seen aggressive prosecutions of public officials, not just by my office, but by our U.S. Attorney for the Southern District and the Middle District as well, and by some of our local state attorneys.
Now, why would some prosecutions of public officials go through your office and others go through different offices? What makes a difference in that for these local officials?
Part of it has to do with how the individual cases are generated. And some of that has to do with individual leads that may be worked. My old office may be working on one particular case that just through conversations with witnesses and informants leads to another. And so if you have a background in a matter that you've already been working, it just makes sense to keep that going. On the federal side, there are particular resources that they have or priorities that they've had over the years.
Because in Palm Beach County, we had several county commissioners, as you're aware, who were convicted, prosecuted, and convicted. And none of that, though, I don't think any of them went through your office.
No, that's correct. Well, what you have to remember is that the Office of Statewide Prosecution, my old office, because as you pointed out, has only jurisdiction for crimes that are multi-circuit. So
if it was just within the county,
right,
then it wouldn't apply.
Most corruption, just by its very nature, is very local. Because it's the local person who's trying to influence the local vote.
Right.
And so those are matters that constitutionally, the Office of Statewide Prosecution didn't have any jurisdiction
Now, there
for.
was one port official that you prosecuted, or was it from Port Charlotte? Public official?
Yes.
Or that you indicted?
Right. There was a
How did that come about?
There was a port commissioner who was convicted, and and he was just convicted this week from an indictment that resulted from the work of the statewide grand jury. And that came about through some work that we were doing with our law enforcement partners at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And the state police were investigating a particular matter, and they gathered evidence and information about this other matter, and it had to do with a very traditional kickback scheme. He was voting for particular projects and was set to get a big percentage back after the construction was complete.
Lovely, and it's good that we get those people out of office for sure. So while doing this prosecution of public corruption and the person being responsible for the grand jury, what insight did you gain about public corruption? Because everyone's always wondering, how does this come about? Are they just bad or crooked people before they get elected to office, or do they get elected to office and just get so overwhelmed and they eventually think that they're God and can do anything and they're above the law?
I think that in some ways there are people who are called to public service because they have a true calling for it. And there are others who just have a tin ear to honesty. And they get into it because they're there to fill their own pocket.
Right, and to exploit the system?
To exploit the system. And whether that's for themselves or their family or their friends. And sometimes it's really not even for money. It's to be a big shot. It's to to do things that we didn't send them there for. But it's a issue, and you see some of the cases that have been prosecuted over the years, not just here in Florida, but in other parts of the country as well. And the dollar amounts are so minimal. People throw away long careers for what you might look at as a trivial amount of money. And so I think that has to force you to reflect and say, there has to be more to this than the golden egg that they're trying to get. I think that a lot of it is as much about power as it is about finances.
What kind of changes did you? I know there was a whole list that came out of that grand jury on public corruption, but what kind of changes do you see as the most important? Can you name 2 or 3 of them?
Sure. I think that as we look forward into behavior that is going to be a risk area for us as a state, that one of the areas that we have to look at when we're talking about privatizing additional and traditional government functions, we have to look clearly at the definition of public official. And I say that because people who are performing what you and I might think of as government jobs are oftentimes not covered by bribery statutes and those sorts of things. And that's because they don't meet the definition because they work for a private contractor.
And the Supreme Court's decision on honest services fraud, does that now hinder prosecutions of public officials, and did that affect your office in any way?
It didn't affect my office other than the fact that there was case law out there that related to it, but we had never used that statute. It was a federal statute, and the state...
It was really a bad statute, didn't you think? I mean, it was so vague. I just couldn't understand.
Well, the court certainly said it was a statute that, if misused, could be misused grossly. And so I think that one of the great hallmarks of our system of jurisprudence, I mean, even if you look back to the bedrock foundations of criminal law and those sorts of things, and the Code of Hammurabi, one of the great things was that it was the first written code.
Right.
You have to put people on notice. People have to know what it is that is illegal, and then based on that, what the punishment is going to be. And so the court said in this particular instance, we think it's just not clear. And if it's not clear, the tie goes to the runner. And so we're not going to hold people accountable for conduct that we didn't tell them was clearly illegal.
Now, before we move on to other things, let me get back to Jim Greer. I don't know if you could answer these questions. Was it your office that decided to did Delmar get immunity?
Delmar entered into an agreement with the state of Florida, and that was through my office. Yes, that's correct.
And he was given immunity because he seemed like I don't know. I always thought he should have been prosecuted too because it seemed he really benefited from that. How does the prosecutor, whether it's your office and not in this particular case, because I know you can't talk about that, but just in general, how do they decide who gets immunity and who doesn't?
Well, here's one of the tough issues and the tough nut to crack in a bribery case. In bribery, it's not the sort of thing, unlike gang crimes or crimes of real violence, where you may have 20 witnesses, or you may have 3 witnesses, or it may be on videotape. A bribe is you and me, and we're not talking about it on your radio program, right? I mean, it's very secret. It's very secret, just by its very insidious nature. And so in order to investigate and prosecute those cases, unlike a drug case where you might be able to show up either with a bag of money or a bag full of narcotics and do the deal, you can't show up typically at the office of an elected official with a bag full of money and say, hey, I'd like you to vote yes or I'd like you to vote no. What do you say? So it's a type of work that has to be much longer and a more sophisticated, proactive work. But if you need something that is a historical matter that you have to look back on, there are really only a couple people who can give you the answers in any kind of bribery case that you're looking for. And so that becomes the issue.
Right. That's how Delmar got immunity. And then,
well,
so in terms of the trial, why hasn't he gone to trial? Why does it take so long?
Well, I'm not involved in the case anymore. My term successfully ended.
How long has it been
January
since the
3rd.
Indictment?
It's probably been over, well, certainly 7 or 8 months.
Oh, that's all? I thought it had been longer.
More than that.
Okay. Well, yeah, because we had John Thrasher as the RPOF chair. And did he serve? I don't know if he served a year. And now we have had another election, and now there's a new chair. So could it have been over a year?
It could have been. I don't know the date off the top of my head.
Because, people always wonder with the prosecutions, the public, why does it take so long? It seems like it's just taking a long time, and I understand that the wheels of justice move slowly.
Well, one of the I think real benefits for Floridians in the state criminal justice system is that defendants in state felony criminal cases have a right to depose witnesses, and they have a whole host of discovery rights that, frankly, in the federal system, whether you're a corporation or an individual, you just don't have. And so there are all sorts of things that the defendant in any criminal case in state court is not only allowed to do, but frankly, it's incumbent upon them and their competent counsel to do those sorts of things. So it's a slower process in state court, but I think many defendants would say that it's a better one because it gives them a better opportunity to really put the government's evidence to test.
Now, some other cases that you handled, there was a Ponzi scheme that was on American Greed on MSNBC. Can you tell us about that one?
Sure. I've been involved in a number of big white collar cases. I mean, we're talking about a whole host of different things over the course of my, frankly, almost 15 years, I guess.
Now, were you involved in that on the defense end or the prosecution end?
On a lot of those cases, I was a prosecutor. And that particular case that you mentioned, I was a prosecutor on, and involved a series of folks who were out selling securities that they literally printed off their home computer. But it had a real fancy glossy brochure that went along with it and a nice sales pitch. And
there's so many schemes here in Florida. It's amazing.
It's just
incredible.
It's just a common. Sadly, it's a common.
Was this out of Miami? Would I guess?
No, this group actually was out of Palm Beach.
Okay, well, close enough. I guess the security is more appropriate to come out of Palm Beach.
Although, if you looked at their letterhead, they would also tell you that they were in Switzerland and
of course.
And London and Paris. However,
right.
Those might have been different parts of his living room, but they didn't have any offices abroad.
Wow. Incredible. And then you had a lot of gang cases.
Right. Over the last 4 years, the Office of Statewide Prosecution got very involved in gang cases because, as you just mentioned, some of the racketeering work we had done in white-collar cases, whether that was securities fraud or insurance fraud cases, and we'd done a lot of those over the years, but we moved into what had been traditional violent street crimes. And we did that partially because Florida had seen a real uptick in gang violence.
Right. Even in Palm Beach County, I know I've heard the state attorney talk about what a problem we have here with gangs.
Right. Certainly Palm Beach County really was focused on it, and Sheriff Rick Bradshaw was doing a great job. And Michael McAuliffe has now done a bunch of these cases too. And when we convened the statewide grand jury on gangs, that was in 2007, 2008, and that was based here in Palm Beach. And frankly, it was based in Palm Beach because Barry Krischer had been very supportive of it. He is the previous state attorney, and Rick Bradshaw had also been very supportive. And so together, that was a fantastic partnership that led to indictments not only here in Palm Beach, but indictments all around the state. And we indicted and convicted over 200 gang defendants, changed the gang laws that allowed prosecutors and police to have better tools to enforce those horrible crimes.
And they made a TV show about it, Gangland?
Right.
And that was all about Florida?
Well, Gangland is a regular program.
Oh, okay.
But they did it. They did an episode.
I guess I missed that one.
Yeah, it's a program that travels on the History Channel, and they did an episode on our office and some of the work that the lawyers in my office had done, and that had really been exceptional.
Now, you said you had 40 lawyers working for you at the Office of Statewide Prosecution.
Right.
Were they specialists? Do some of them specialize in wiretaps, RICO, gangs, or do they all basically kind of do criminal prosecution, generic?
Well, everybody who's in that office, frankly, is sort of the best of the best and the top of their game, and they have the skill set to work on any subject matter. There are some people who are just naturally drawn to work on some kinds of cases over others because they just happen to like it personally and professionally. And the benefit to the lawyers in my office was that unlike other offices, whether it's in the federal government or in the state government, they really had a freedom to work the kinds of cases they wanted to. So I had lawyers who might have a gang case and a big drug case and a big mortgage fraud case, all
So they
within their
weren't
own
really
docket.
separated.
Right. They didn't have to do 4 years of nothing but drug cases.